It took a little bit of time, certainly a month or so
Yeah.
of my microdosing, because for those folks who aren't that familiar with the difference and what you're speaking about, like a full dose journey with a medicine like ayahuasca or with psilocybin, like on those journeys, like you are literally on a trip. You're on
Yeah.
a trip. You are not yourself. You are possibly hallucinating. You're seeing colors and maybe even experiencing things within your mind's eye. And microdosing is where you take a very small amount of a psychedelic substance. And so, because of how gentle microdosing is, I didn't have any of those huge off to the cosmos journeys at first.
Welcome to Unleash Thyself, a podcast where we dive into personal transformation, spirituality, and growth. I'm your host, Konstantin Moron, and today we have an inspiring guest with us, Leslie Draffin. Leslie is a somatic psychedelic guide, sensual embodiment coach, and a menstrual cycle educator dedicated to helping women embrace their bodies, sexuality, and the healing power of psychedelics. Now, she supports conscious women and menstruators in their journey toward healing and deeper connection with the divine through intentional microdosing, womb reconnection, pleasure activation, and cyclical living. In this episode, Leslie will share her personal journey from being a TV news anchor dealing with anxiety and depression to discovering the transformative potential of psilocybin mushrooms. She will discuss the profound impact psychedelics had on her sobriety and mental health and introduce us to her innovative cyclical microdosing method, which aligns microdosing with the menstrual cycle to enhance well-being and creativity. Get ready to explore the healing power of plant medicines, the importance of reconnecting with our bodies, and the incredible transformation that comes from living in alignment with our true selves. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement helps us bring these transformative stories to light. Now let's begin. Hello, beautiful souls. I have here with me today none other than Leslie Draffin. Leslie, welcome to the show. It's such a pleasure to have you with us.
Constantine, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation.
Yes, me too. I'm excited to delve a bit deeper into how essentially Mother Earth through plant medicine and other ways can help us truly heal deep wounds and things that we wouldn't believe possible unless we saw it with our own eyes in someone else doing it, or of course, in the world getting healed through us. So let's dive right in. I know you are what's called a psychedelic guide.
Mhm.
Tell us a bit more about how you stumbled upon this, because I've read your story. It's actually fascinating to see you go from one area to the next.
Mhm.
But of course, our audience may not have heard the beautiful story.
Yeah, so I really stumbled upon earth medicine, psilocybin specifically, when I was going through a really tough time in my life. I was a TV news anchor for about 15 years. And through the pandemic, I was struggling mentally. My mental health was really taking a toll. Things like anxiety, depression, burnout, and PTSD. And I'd already been on this spiritual healing journey for a few years when I heard about microdosing psilocybin on a podcast. So I immediately reached out to that woman. Her name is Bijou, and hired her as my coach because I was really intrigued by the aspect of this sacred medicine really helping to tap into subconscious blocks. I'd been
Yeah.
in therapy, I'd taken medication already, and I was still felt stuck. And so over the next couple of months, working with her and working with the medicine, it was like welcoming in just the death card. If you know anything about tarot, like the tower card, the death card, the darkest night of the soul I think I had been on yet on the ride that is my current life on this planet. And I ended up leaving my job, grieving that loss. You know, this was a job I'd wanted since I was a child. It was my dream job that had become a nightmare, losing two of our dogs back to back, and really having to grapple with, like, why the fuck am I here? I really thought I was like this one person. And now I'm understanding this might not be the path. And so after working with the medicine for about a year, and seeing it really transform my life, go from being anxious very often, drinking to subdue that anxiety, to really having very little anxiety, very little depression, no longer even using any medications. I really felt called to explore becoming a guide to help women just like me move through those aspects of healing. And so I spent 2023 in a deep certification for psychedelic medicine, as well as a separate one for somatic trauma recovery. And now I really help women who, like me, maybe you've been in therapy, maybe you've taken medication, maybe meditation and these spiritual tools you thought were going to be the thing for you just don't seem to be working quite like you'd hoped. I help those women really find a way to heal themselves through the assistance of this earth medicine.
Yes. Well, beautiful, powerful story there, Leslie. And so many parts I want to dive into. I want to go to one of the first things you mentioned, which is you have been doing something for 15 years, something you thought you always wanted to do, and yet you found yourself at a crossroad. Now that you're on the other side and you're on this journey as a guide, as a healer, is this now what you've realized that your true calling is, and what you did in the past perhaps is just preparing you for this journey?
I thought for the longest time that my dharma is to be a teacher in some way, a teacher, a guide. And when I look back at my TV career, I think I was actually doing that. I was a teacher, I was a guide. I like to say I'm a very activating person. I like to give myself the moniker permissionary and awakener. And I think that in a lot of ways, I was still that way as a TV news anchor, especially through the pandemic, just with the comments we would get or the people who would call the station. I felt like I was able to still do a bit of that Dharma by being a guidepost and like a little light post for those folks who are going through collectively this incredibly dark time. So I don't think that it was necessarily the biggest detour, actually, to go from an on screen storyteller and someone who asked questions for a living to now asking the deepest questions about people
Exactly.
and their life.
Yeah, plus you have your own show, right? You have your own podcast, which is another form of pretty much the same thing you were doing anyway.
Yeah.
It's just taking it to the next level, so to speak. That's how I'm seeing it anyway. It's beautiful. It's beautiful to see. Now, you said you discovered this medicine, this earth medicine. And to be honest, the reason I'm on the path I'm on right now is because of plant medicine that I got to experience in the jungles of Ecuador
Mhm.
back a few years ago now. And it really, truly opened up my eyes to what's possible, to how the world should be, to how things could be. And then it pretty much told me, it's like, you figure it out. If you want to go down the path, fine. But I found that once the genie's out of the bottle, it's very hard to put it back in. So
Mhm.
I'm curious to see your experience once, I guess, for lack of a better term, maybe got a taste of the medicine. How was it? Did you realize in that moment that that was everything that you've been missing all your life to be better, to be in a better space?
I think it took a little bit of time, certainly a month or so
Yeah.
of my microdosing. Because for those folks who aren't that familiar with the difference and what you're speaking about, like a full dose journey with a medicine like ayahuasca or with psilocybin, like on those journeys, like you are literally on a trip. You're on
Yeah.
a trip. You are not yourself. You are possibly hallucinating. You're seeing colors and maybe even experiencing things within your mind's eye. And microdosing is where you take a very small amount of a psychedelic substance. And so, because of how gentle microdosing is, I didn't have any of those huge off to the cosmos journeys at
Sure.
first. Then I went on my first full dose psilocybin journey. It was for my birthday in 2022. And I had played around with some psychedelics for a few years by this point, but not anything super intentional. And I went into that. My husband was so freaked out because he was on a trip and I was like not a metaphorical trip, a literal. He was not in town.
Yeah.
And I was going on a trip alone here at my house, but I felt so solid because I'd had that support of a coach. And so I took a few grams, very much like set my intention, and like I mentioned, I had been going through these struggles with work, but another thing internally I was really struggling with was my maiden to mother journey. I
Mm,
am child free by choice, but I felt so stuck in the inner maiden aspect of my life and my archetype. And I didn't understand how I could move into this next phase of life. This was my 35th birthday or 36th birthday. I'm very solidly in the quote unquote mother stage, but I didn't feel that way. And so I invoked the great mother. And of course, in this journey, I had like pains. I was in labor. My dog came to me as a human child, as my guide. And I really started to understand what you were saying. Like, the path that you seek is before you, and you can either choose to go on it or not, like you said. So
yeah.
I did experience pretty quickly, about 2 months into my coaching with my coach, massive changes. And When we look at some of the experts and the greats in this field, especially those who are doing studies in the 1950s and 60s, they talk about this too. Like, look at Ram Dass. He completely changed his whole life once he started using and communing with these sacred medicines. And it's not lost on me that, what, 3 months after I started this journey, I left behind a 15-year career.
Yeah, that's a big step, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I've met a lot of amazing people since I began my journey, and I'm still in the corporate life. It allowed me to actually become a much better coworker, enjoy my job more, but also be able to do more things in my personal life. And I'm looking at my friends and people I've met on this journey, and some like you have made drastic changes in life because they're so far apart from what they knew they have to be,
Mhm.
and some like myself that are merging the two worlds together, at least for the time being,
Yeah.
and seeing a lot more positive results. And of course, there are the other people that have seen the light, but then they are too afraid. Perhaps they're not ready yet to make the leap
Mhm.
into the direction of their life or the direction that they could be in.
Yeah.
And I find it very interesting. And I'm curious to see from the people you get to help now, get to work with, and get to assist. Are you seeing a bit of the same struggle where some people are more keen and understanding and like, okay, this is my path and I need to embrace it fully, and others being more resistant? Or the people that come to you are mostly open so you don't have to worry about the resistance as much?
I haven't had anyone quit their full job while working with me. I certainly have supported entrepreneurs who had recently left
Mhm.
their corporate jobs and now, like I was 2 years ago, pondering what is their purpose. I've worked with
Yes.
several people like that. But I do actually wrapped up a client today, a wonderful woman who is a nurse in the mental health field. And she told me today she was going to go back and get her master's and hopefully doctorate. And eventually she wanted to incorporate medicine into a practice to help people too. So it's interesting, right? What you said. I see folks like yourself incorporating the beauty of this medicine into their current life without making these massive career changes. And I don't necessarily think that's necessary to make a huge career change. Um, and I see folks as well who do really use this medicine to help them with their physical, like, career purpose. And I think it's really interesting how the medicine gives you what you need, not necessarily what you want. So if something like you need that kick in the ass to get out of TV, like it was me, it really helped push me, even though I was already like mostly out of the door.
Yeah, and I love what you just said there, right? It doesn't give you what you want; it gives you what you need. And I've seen that with my own eyes, in my own experiences, and of course, with the plenty of people I've been able to hear stories from, but also sit with. And what I have found in life is such a beautiful metaphor for any mentor you have in life, any coach, is that a truly good coach or someone that's in your corner, it doesn't matter if it's a plant medicine, Mother Earth, or anything else, will always give you what you need, not what you want. It may start with, I wouldn't say the illusion, but the hope, hey, I'm going to help you get what you want,
Mhm.
but then I'm going to help you get what you need. And I know most people, at least the people I've encountered, are not necessarily always willing to go for what they need because they know it may be tough. It may be going against everything they know, or at least against some of what they know. So it's kind of almost like inviting them in with a preface that, yes, you're going to get what you want, but also you're going to get what you need.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and I find that so beautiful. And I'm curious to see with you're talking about, or you talk about creating the very first cycled informed microdosing protocol. So I'm curious what it is because in my research preparing for this episode, and I had a few others with microdosing specialists, usually the protocols are fairly simple. You either are 4 days on, 3 days off, you alternate days because, of course, you build a tolerance. So you don't want to be taking the mushrooms as often as every day, like other supplements. But I'm curious to see how yours differs and why you went down this path.
Yeah. So I actually started my coaching career as a menstrual cycle coach because I had so many issues coming off of the pill back in.
Hey, it's Konstantin here, and I want to take a brief moment to truly thank you for being a part of this incredible journey of transformation. You are the reason we are creating this content. I see you and I appreciate you. Your support truly means the world to me. I want to ask you for a small favor. I'd love for you to join our mission by hitting like, subscribe, or leaving a thoughtful comment or review. Your engagement helps others discover these insights, and together we can continue to unlock the power of authenticity and personal transformation. And if you want to reach out directly to me, send me an email at constantine@unleashthyself.com. I value any and all feedback. Thank you for being a part of this movement. Now, back to the episode.
2020. And so when I started working with psilocybin and then studying last year, I had this epiphany that I think people with periods, women and those who menstruate, might benefit more from microdosing than anybody else for a couple of reasons. One is we know that those folks are ones who are most often diagnosed with things like anxiety, depression, and PTSD. We also know that people with periods have cyclical pain pretty regularly every month. And because of the fact that happiness overall has been down, but specifically the happiness of women and moms and folks like that, my hypothesis was okay, well, psilocybin and microdosing specifically would probably help those people more. And because I already understood how impactful it is to live a cyclical life, and that means living in tune with your menstrual cycle, going easy on certain phases of the cycle, pushing harder at other times, versus thinking that just like male hormones, you have to be consistent every
Mhm.
24-hour period. I really understood that, okay, if we can pair psilocybin with the cycle, it will reduce cyclical challenges like PMS, PMDD, and cramps, and help boost mood all cycle long. So I tested this theory last year with several people, and myself included. And very quickly, what I realized is that it's reducing cramps in almost every single person I've worked with. It's
Wow.
also helping mood swings drastically go down because I think anyone who microdoses gets this. You often just find this way to respond versus react. And late luteal phase PMS, PMDD sufferers have a big problem responding versus reacting, right? Reacting is that thing. That's why you're freaking out at your loved ones. So the cyclical microdosing method is a little bit confusing for folks who aren't living a cyclical life, but the gist of it is you look at the menstrual cycle. And since you don't have one, I would assume I will explain it. You're always somewhere in your menstrual cycle if you're of reproductive age and you have a uterus. And so it starts on the first day of your period, your bleed, and it goes until the day before your next bleed. So that's usually 28 to 35 days. What the cyclical microdosing method does is it splits that cycle in half. And so the 2 to 2.5 weeks after your period, you would sit with medicine 1 day on, 2 days off. So that's an average of 3 times a week. Then, after ovulation, and when your cycle challenges pop up, so when you notice that you're more tired, when you're hungrier, when your anxiety or anger starts to peak up, usually about 10 to 12 days before your bleed, you would sit with medicine 3 days on, 2 days off, and repeat. And so, just like you said, it gives a lot of space to have that integration off the medicine in the first half of the cycle where you're sitting with microdosing a little bit less.
Mhm.
And when those cyclical challenges pop up more often in the second half of the cycle, you have the assistance of psilocybin to help you move through those challenges as well.
Okay, wow, that's interesting. And of course, as I don't have a menstrual cycle, how would someone like myself, maybe perhaps even a woman that perhaps is past that age, can they still see benefit from something like this, or you're seeing more of a traditional approach still working just fine?
First of all, I want to say that I think traditional approaches and protocols are great. The 3 days, like you mentioned, 3 times a week. For beginners, I think a protocol is important just because you want to understand that this is something that's cumulative when you work with the medicine. For women or those who don't bleed but want to really experience the cyclicalness of life, I always recommend working with the moon. So we're in the new moon right now as we record this. I'm also bleeding. A lot of folks bleed at the new moon. And so this would be a time when you would be sitting with the medicine 3 days in a row, skip 2 days, and repeat. And then around the full moon, you would shift to that 1 day on the medicine, 2 days off.
Okay.
So there's certainly ways to use the cyclical microdosing method, whether you're bleeding or not. I've worked with folks who are breastfeeding and are no longer having a menstrual cycle regularly, but they choose to commune with the moon. And I think the moon is just such a beautiful example of a cyclical person because our cycle hormones very much mimic the rotation of the moon, right? Like
Yeah.
male hormones mimic the sun.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful way to say it. I agree 100% with that. And what I've seen, I don't have personal experience with microdosing, but I've seen from talking to some friends and having other people on the show discuss this, and you mentioned this as well, is that this is not something you take one day and you see the benefits immediately. It's something that builds up,
Mhm.
like any supplement, any medicine you take. It can take a bit of time. Now, what have you seen? I know you mentioned about 2 months earlier. I would imagine that's pretty much, I would say, let's call it the average, because some people could see it earlier, some could see it later. But I'm curious to see what you've seen in your experience.
It really depends on how quickly folks find their sweet spot. So, that range of perfect dose for them. Usually that's between 100 milligrams and 500 milligrams. That can be tricky for folks who are really sensitive. I've worked with some people who use 25 milligrams because they're so sensitive to psilocybin. And for those folks, I think it does take a little bit longer to really start to see the benefits because it's taking them longer to figure out their dose. And the reason it takes a bit longer is sometimes they'll take a bit too much, get a little freaked out, skip more than a week, and then they have to go back from square one. But I think 3 to 4 weeks is usually the average for when you can start to see benefits. And there's this word thrown around in the psychedelic community, sub-perceptual, when it comes to
Okay.
microdosing. I don't believe that microdosing is sub-perceptual because that really means that it's so small you can't like perceive any differences, any changes. I usually just call it non-intoxicating because you're able to go about your daily life. But if you're someone who is really tuned into themselves, you very quickly will notice more presence. You'll notice, again, reactivity lessens, more patience, especially with little kids. And really, I think 3 to 4 weeks in, you're able to notice some benefits in your life. And I think that's how folks stay encouraged to stay the course. I really think for beginners, 3 to 4 months total is a great spot to commit to a microdosing protocol and then take about a month or two off.
That's what I've heard as well. And I have lots of friends in all walks of life that are taking this and are swearing by it. And like you mentioned, there are periods when you want to be off,
Yep.
and there are periods when you want to go back on, and the benefits stick around quite a bit. And it's actually fascinating to look. And there's, of course, research, like you mentioned, from the 50s and 60s. There are even shows on Netflix one can watch to see the benefits of psilocybin. And I believe last year, I was watching one of the shows on Netflix, and it showed how essentially they were testing psilocybin, the bigger dosages, but in a pill form, and they would give them to people later in life.
Hmm.
Right. And what they have discovered, and what they were saying that at least in the show, from what I remember, is how essentially people would go in fearing death as in a daily thing, and I'm afraid of dying because I'm getting to the end of my life, coming out of it and being like, yeah, now I understand. There's nothing to fear.
Yep.
And just that fact alone, that sat with me really nicely, because there was a very similar experience with me with ayahuasca a couple of years prior to that. And it's so interesting to see. Of course, microdosing, like you said, has different effects.
Hmm.
So that's likely not one of the effects people will experience. But let's go back to the effects that you can experience on microdosing. So you already mentioned, less PMS, less PMDD.
Yeah.
You do mention things like creativity and happiness increase. But what else have you seen that people maybe either are taking for granted, that they either don't have enough in life or they don't need that in life, or are not realizing until they actually have more of it?
It's definitely sex. It's definitely libido.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
connection to partners, it's connection to self. So, interestingly enough, when I started working with my coach in 22, mental health was not really what I thought I was gonna tackle with my microdosing protocol. I had heard her talk about the amazing benefits of psilocybin microdosing on sex drive and libido. So
Okay.
I had really lost my libido. Obviously, I was burnt out, but my post pill journey really had me like having little to no sex drive. And I had tried everything, right? I had gotten the toys, I had gone to therapy, like all the things. So I thought, okay, I will invite this medicine into my life with the intention of becoming more open to receiving pleasure. Now, in my history as well, I have some sexual trauma around the fact that I was diagnosed with herpes at 18 as a preacher's daughter in the deep south of the states where like sexual shame just was like rampant, right? So that was a big block that I had. And I really was hoping that the medicine would help me move that block. And like I said, it gives you what you need, not what you want, because what the medicine I believe heard is Leslie needs to be open to receiving. So we had a whole year of I left a job, I had to learn to trust the universe, figure out what I am in this world. And then finally in 23, the orgasms came back. I felt that for me, the reason it worked so well around sex and pleasure specifically was because I was that person who was in her head when it would be time to get busy. I'd think about all my to-do list. I think about what I had for dinner. I think about some weird TV show that I was thinking everything else besides what was happening in my body. And I would almost disassociate out of that situation. And so microdosing helped me get back in touch with what pleasure meant to me. Not even just sexual pleasure, but just how wonderful it feels to sit outside and listen to the birds in the morning, to learn to get quiet and present. And so I think that's why it impacted me so much. And I also am seeing that happen with my clients. This ability to finally understand, what do I like? What do I not like? How do I ask for it? And how can I just slow down so that I can enjoy what's happening to me, whether it's sexually or just in life in general?
Yes, I love that so much. And thank you for sharing such a vulnerable experience. And you touched on this a couple of times now, being present. And that's such a big thing I've come to realize, because you see, I was no different than you, and most people always distracted, always busy with the next thing, and never in the moment, not even during more intimate times. And I have found, like you, that being able to bring yourself to presence is probably one of the most important things you can do for yourself,
Mhm.
for your highest good. And it's not easy. I use mindfulness exercise, I use breath work. I did the plant medicine journeys in the past, right? It takes a bit of effort, right? And to hear that something like microdosing could potentially help there, that's a plus. Because if you look at pretty much any other forms of medication, traditional medication that I've seen, and I've tried supplements and whatnot, they don't necessarily help you with being present.
Yeah.
So this is powerful.
Yeah.
What else have you found with being present that people maybe take either for granted or are not aware of? Is there anything that comes up for you? You talked about the benefits of discovering yourself or being intimate. What else have you seen? Because I know there's a lot more that we can dive into, and I'll leave it to you.
Yeah. I think for me, what I realized was when I started my spiritual journey in 2019, meditation was like the thing that I started. I also started crystals and astrology, all those little gateway drugs to like the spiritual life that folks love to latch onto, myself included. But I always wondered, like, why was meditation so hard for me? Why was it hard for me to quiet my mind? And why could I listen to these meditations, guided ones, and sometimes have do a great job of it? And
Yeah.
some days I was doing a pretty crappy job. And so I think what was interesting for me when I started to microdose is one, just the ability to like not judge what's coming up. Right. So even
Mm,
if I was in meditation and I was like thinking about everything and nothing, instead of judging myself like I would have before, like rating how good my practice was that day, the judgment really just fell away. And I think that's a really interesting aspect of just life in general, because my
yes.
judgment has just like really fallen away about a lot of things. And the other thing I think that is by far, well, probably by far the biggest impact of my life, other than the better sex drive, is that I've gotten sober. Like I've been sober for well over a year because of microdosing. And I
Okay.
was like a full wino, an alcohol abuser in my 20s to fully disconnect to my body. Um, so the sobriety thing I think is also a really interesting aspect of folks noticing this when they start to microdose. So if you want to dive into that, we totally can. It's a fascinating aspect.
Yeah, let's go. Let's go deeper. Let's go deeper. I have another question that comes up, but that can wait.
Okay. Yeah.
So go ahead.
So for me, I had been experimenting with sobriety since 2020,
Mhm.
going a month or two without drinking, just because I knew how bad my anxiety was getting. And I read this great book by a woman named Ruby Warrington, Sober Curious. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to get curious about being sober.
Mm,
And it would last for, I think the longest time, maybe like 100 days. But then I always had this clock in my mind, like, all right, after 100 days, we can have a drink. And I would always go back to drinking. And even when I would experience really great benefits of being sober, like better sleep, less anxiety, more presence, I always had that like countdown going for when I
yeah.
could pop open that like bottle of champagne. So I started in late 2022, I noticed, because that's another thing microdosing does. It really helps you notice all your shit. I noticed how much I was drinking and I noticed why. I noticed that it was because I felt really uncomfortable. I'd already left my job at this point. I was trying to figure out what was next for me as far as being an entrepreneur. My husband was launching his business, and I was really turning to alcohol to cope. And so I said, you know what? Let's go sober for a while. And so the day after Christmas 2022, I stopped drinking and I entered into a very intentional microdosing practice starting in January, where my intention was to just take my precious time and to see what happened. And little by little, as I focused on other things and really focused on managing my nervous system, I just saw the weeks and then the months pass by where I was like, oh, shoot, like it's been so suddenly it was 6 months and I hadn't been drinking. And I thought, well, God, I guess we'll just go to a year and see what happens. And now we're at like 14 or 15 months and my taste buds have changed significantly. Like I've tasted alcohol in the last month or so and it just doesn't taste the same. I don't like crave it at all. When I notice myself having those feelings of wanting to numb out, sometimes, of course, I disassociate into scrolling socials or watching Netflix. But I also have that ability to pull back and look at myself and think, okay, let's connect these dots. Like, why are we feeling this way? What sensations are coming up for you now? And I think what's really interesting too is now drinking feels like a self betrayal because I've
Mhm.
done all of this work and I understand how much more there is to be gained sans alcohol. And I know I would never be here without microdosing because I'd already tried it for several years without psilocybin. And now here we are. And the other thing, and I know this is probably a question folks might have, is she just microdosing every time she wants to drink? Yes and no. So, what I noticed is that I have some social anxiety. And so, if I'm going to a party or if my friends want to go out, maybe I will microdose that day just to help me feel more present and have that support. But I haven't actually done more than two microdosing protocols. So I've only microdosed for about 3.5 months of that 15-month sobriety. So it's not like I guess I share that so you guys don't think that like I'm microdosing for 15 months to not drink alcohol. For me, it was those 2 months and then another refresher about 6 months later. And that's almost all I needed to really tap in, which I found really fascinating.
Absolutely. And I mean, listening to you there, of course, gives me hope for the future for many reasons. But one thing you touched upon many times now is the idea of being present and how that essentially allowed you to tap into realizing what was going on with the alcohol, what it was doing to you, but also allowing you to tap into your own feelings and emotions, which is one thing that, for example, myself, I use other things to get away from. Not alcohol in my case, but food,
Yeah,
sex, other things were always an escape. And it sounds like alcohol might have been in your case
100%.
and in the case of many other people. So it's beautiful to see that by just getting back to the present moment, really it's like has this cascade of effects in your life, and it can help you quit drinking, for example, quit smoking, I would imagine, lose weight, as I'm seeing that in my life right now, and so many other beautiful things. And I love that we went deep on that, because I personally, when I talk to people, when I get to help people, I go on shows as a guest. That's one of the number one things that I bring up as well, is we gotta get present with ourselves. And it's not easy because no one teaches you how to do that. And if you want to get a bit of help, then it sounds like microdosing might be one of those allies in your court. And you mentioned meditation as well, right? And that's another way to ground yourself or to bring yourself to the present. Breath work. And it's funny enough that recently, like yourself, I've had some days where I would disassociate and go to Facebook and scroll. And through my meditations, one of the messages that came through for me was that when you start catching yourself doing that, that's the moment, like you beautifully put, to ask questions.
Mhm.
What am I trying to get away from? What am I not feeling? What am I not allowing to come through? And for me, my message was clear, and I've tested this a few times now, and it's like so marvelous. It was like, take a few deep breaths in, go into meditation, and ask the questions, and you will get the answers.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to see how simple it can be. And then essentially, instead of spending 5 hours doom scrolling, you're pretty much, spend 5, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is, to meditate, and then you're back to, like, not only in a better state because you're not wasted, you haven't wasted 4 hours,
Mhm.
but because you've been able to actually uncover something about yourself.
The other
Yeah.
thing I'll say too is meditation. I think it's so essential, especially for helping quiet the mind. The other thing, though, is noticing the sensations in your body. So,
Mm.
what's so fascinating about the feelings that we experience is that's just what our brain tells us based on the sensations that are inside our body. And so, oftentimes, because we're very mind based humans, right? That's the MO of living as a human on this planet. We think, okay, this is anxiety without actually noticing where the sensations are in our body. So, what I'll start to do if I notice the scrolling is okay, versus asking, what am I feeling or what am I avoiding the feeling? What is actually happening in my body that makes me feel like I need to scroll because I don't feel safe? Or I need to scroll because like I'm bored, or what is the sensation? And
Yes.
I've really started to use different tools in addition to meditation to jump out of that. So, shaking my body, like self touch, just like giving my arms a squeeze. If I feel a little sad and I'm scrolling to just avoid that sadness because I feel that heaviness in my heart or the tears welling in my eyes, like giving myself some touch. Or, and I know this is a super hot topic now, I have really been so into cold plunge in the past like 6 months because of the way that it really boosts resilience. And for me, it really helps to like, while it does like put you in that fight or flight state while you're in that freezing cold water, when you get out of it, your ability to come back into rest and to come back into the safety zone, I don't know, it like it's stretched my resilience so far that now I'm like, okay, we can notice things. So for folks listening, let's say like if you notice that too, but you don't feel meditation is working for you, maybe you need to dance, maybe you need to sing, maybe you need to just go for a walk or like punch a pillow. There are so many other aspects too of like how we can feel better in addition to microdosing, in addition to meditation, that I think are really essential for folks to live a life that feels good, because we want to feel good and we know we're not going to feel good always, but we have the power to like shift our state through connecting to our flesh, right? Like to our meat suit. And I
Yeah.
spent so many years starving myself and abusing alcohol and living in shame that it's only been in my late 30s that I'm finally figuring this out. And if I could tell little Leslie anything, it would be like, this is the key, this is the magic. It's you, it's your body, it's listening to that part of you.
Yes. I mean, if I'm hearing correctly as well, is the medicine allowed you to remember what you knew all along, which is that message you wanted to give little Leslie, which is you have the power to do anything and everything that you want. But sometimes you need a guide, sometimes you need a mentor, a coach, someone in your corner to help you see that. And it's so beautiful to see, like you said, there's so many ways that one can get to that. And what works for me may not work for you, and vice versa. But at least there are things you can try, and you can say, you know what, I've tried this for a month or two, doesn't work, I'm going to go to the next thing.
Yeah.
And that's how my journey has been. I've tried meditation at the beginning, some forms didn't work for me until I found something that works for me.
Mhm.
My other mindfulness practices, same idea, right? It doesn't necessarily, just because it doesn't work for you doesn't mean you're broken. It just
100%.
means you haven't found the right tool.
Oh my goddess, yes, I'm so glad
Yeah.
you said that too. And I also think, you know, something I say a lot is if you've been in therapy and it's not working, you're also not broken. You're not too damaged for therapy, especially talk therapy, because talking about your trauma actually doesn't help you heal your trauma. Like you can talk it till you're blue in the face and nothing's going to shift inside of you. And it's not until I think what you just said, you find something else that's helping to move through what's held in your body, meditation or movement or microdosing or whatever that might be, that you can really remember that you always have had the answer. But our life is about forgetting and coming back. Life is a psychedelic experience. It's going through the ups and downs and like that portal into
Well,
your newest self. And I've been a million different versions of myself in the last 5 years. I'm sure
I
I'll be
love
a
that.
million more.
The same. And actually, funny enough, I was reading a beautiful book last week even. And one of the things that was shared that finally clicked for me, and I'll share with you, I think it's the first time I talk about this on the podcast, is this idea that when we decided to be in this life, whatever you believe in, whatever religion you are, or whatever spirituality practice you believe in, we can almost all agree that we chose to be here. And then in the choosing, we also chose to forget. So we can remember, right, here's the key part that I missed this entire time. In this book, they mentioned that you chose to forget because otherwise you wouldn't be able to fulfill whatever mission you came for, because you wouldn't be able to relate to those in your life by not being with them, by experiencing what it is to be a human being, assuming, of course, you're this celestial being coming in. And now it's okay, you've gone through that process, like you've done, you're in your mid to late 30s, finding out. Same for me, I turned 40 last year. My journey started in my mid to late 30s as well. It's almost like it's a remembrance. You're remembering and remembering and remembering. You're like, but I understand why I had to forget, because I had to learn all these things and how things work so I can help other people on this beautiful journey. And
Mhm.
that's when it all clicked. And pretty much that's what I was hearing from you as well. So I figured I shared that.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I'm loving this conversation. So we touched on the subconscious mind. That's something that I personally take a lot of interest in from a psychology side of things. Psychology is a passion of mine, but also spirituality.
Mhm.
And we talked a bit about, or you mentioned rather, the nervous system. And essentially, the way I see it is subconscious mind through the nervous system delivers messages to your conscious mind, and then you do things, right? We talked about reactions versus responding. And one thing I have found, and I'm curious to see what you have found, is that when you start listening to yourself, when you start going inwards, you start to essentially unpack all those limiting beliefs or beliefs, all those lies you have been telling yourself just because someone else may have told you that lie when you were younger.
Mhm.
And I wonder what you've seen with plant medicine, or specifically psilocybin microdosing, when it comes to helping you tap into those parts of you, because you hinted towards it at the beginning. But I'd love to go a bit deeper if we may.
Yeah, for sure. What I really find very interesting in my own story and my journey with psilocybin, both in a microdose and in a full dose, is I never could understand why in this conscious life of mine, I had so much fear and scarcity. Like from
Mm,
a very young age, I was terrified that the bottom was going to fall out. Like I didn't understand. Like I had a very solid upbringing. We didn't have a ton. My dad was a preacher. There was no cause for me to be like worried and terrified at age 5 and 6 that like something was going to happen and we were going to be destitute. Right. So last year, in a full dose journey, what I realized is that the trauma that I was holding and that was manifesting in this form of scarcity and fear and worry about some big monster coming around the corner was because of what happened to me in utero. So I was adopted. My birth mom was 12
mm.
when she got
Oh, wow.
pregnant and had just turned 13 when I was born. She was basically kicked out of her home when her mom found out that she was pregnant. And so she went to live with this new family. I ended up being adopted, so on and so forth. And there was a month where, as I'm alive at that point, a month of me living in a foster home. Now, I'm never going to like remember what happened at that point. I'm not going to remember consciously like what happened in utero, but I know that uneasiness, those feelings of the bottom falling out, like, of course, that came from her, from those cortisol that was happening through her body while she was pregnant with me. Because I was about 6.5 months in utero when she even discovered she was pregnant, clearly, because she was so young. So I knew that had to have been because of what was happening then. And so that full dose journey that I was on, where I saw that intuitive hit happen before me and see like how much empathy I could have for myself and for her mother and her grandmother and all of these other people in my life, really helped me notice how this pattern that I had been noticing in myself for my whole life pretty much always linked back to that. And I never would have put that together, I don't think, without psilocybin. I may have put it together eventually, but it certainly would not have been presented to me like I'm watching this movie, like it was when I was in this full dose mushroom trip. And so with microdosing, I think it's a little different. I think that folks often get like a little aha moment. Like, picture you're in like a super dark room and you have a flashlight, and microdosing, I think, is like that light from the flashlight that kind of shines a light onto a shelf and you see a little bit of each thing. Full dose journey is no, we're just going to shine a big ass spotlight on that shit. And it's ta-da, same with
Yeah.
ayahuasca. But it's just that you're still seeing what's happening. It's just in a little bit smaller ray of light. And so for me, the subconscious mind is just something that I am constantly curious about and almost having a conversation with it. Who knows what's in there? Come on out if you want. But that's been my experience with medicine and the subconscious.
I love that. And thank you again for sharing that, Leslie. And I can resonate with it because I've had similar experiences and I've heard stories of people that sat with me in the same plant medicine journeys, and very similar stories. And looking at the science, because it always fascinates me to see how far we've come along.
Mhm.
There are many research papers now showing that, yes, what happens to you while you're in the womb of your mother will have an impact on your life.
Yeah.
Because in the end, if we believe that everything is energy, which we have no reason not to, then it would make sense as soon as we come into being, and that's early in the process, then we're going to be impacted by whatever goes on. So that's why, for example, I grew up in Eastern Europe during a time of a lot of scarcity during the communist time. And I thought I had a great childhood because I did. At the end, I was shielded externally from a lot of things, but energetically, I still felt everything
Yeah.
through the pain of my caregivers, my grandparents, my parents, and then, of course, teachers and peers and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a big miss when it comes to more traditional ways that haven't caught up yet to this idea that just because I'm protecting you and I'm not showing you how bad things are, it doesn't mean it's not going to impact you. And that's where a lot of healing tends to happen. And as I mentioned, I didn't know I had any trauma, to be honest with you. And it wasn't until I started unpacking through initially plant medicine and then hypnotherapy worked really well for me. It's when I was like, wow, kind of like your experience through hypnotherapy, no plant medicine, I got to see my 2-year-old self and my 1-year-old self. And I'm like, how is that even possible? Now, through my ayahuasca journey, like the movie you described, I got to see my mom pregnant with me, and I got to see again my 2 months old and people watching me and all that stuff. It was really beautiful to see. And for those that haven't had this experience yet, I don't think we can even do it justice on a podcast.
Yeah.
But it can be magical because it provides you with essentially the information that you have within you, but you don't necessarily have easy access to
Yeah.
in order to be able to heal a part of you that you never knew you needed to heal.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it gets very deep.
Yeah, I saw this like this graphic in a book that I read about psychedelic integration. And I think we've all seen the iceberg picture, right? Like
Yeah.
the iceberg, what's above the iceberg is your conscious mind. The iceberg below the water is the subconscious. But this graphic also had the abyss below the iceberg. That's like the mystical. That's like what psychedelics do so well of. Not only are we going to go into your unconscious, but we're going to show you shit that like you would never even have thought could be possible. And I think that's what's also so fascinating about medicine, whether it's at a full dose or a microdose. And something that I really love that we're seeing in studies now that we're actually studying this again, thank goodness, is that when we have those mystical or spiritual experiences with a medicine like psilocybin or ayahuasca or whatever it is, that's where shift really does start to happen. I've seen and I've read some studies where it's if you pair that mystical or spiritual experience with this habit stacking of things like sobriety or whatever it is, smoking or whatever,
Hmm.
even eating better, taking better care of your human vessel, I think that's where the big change happens because it's just the pairing of those two things.
And you're right about the studies because I'm fascinated about that too. And I'm seeing so much come out with PTSD and veterans being treated with medicine like this. And of course, it's going to take a bit of time for all of it to open up. But a dear friend of mine, she's based in Texas, she's a therapist, and now she's getting licensed in or using psilocybin. Now, you can do it in most states, but Idaho, I believe, and a couple of others are actually legalizing
Mhm.
therapy with the use of psilocybin. So can you imagine just a decade from now, it's going to likely be a lot more open
Yeah.
and people will not have to suffer as much as they have to suffer now.
Yeah. We've certainly seen, I think Australia has made it so that they can prescribe either psilocybin or MDMA or both. And my husband is a veteran. When I was in TV, I was a military reporter. We have a lot of veteran friends, my brother in laws. And I, as someone who was also diagnosed with PTSD, not a veteran though, like I'm just so excited about the fact that it's going to be another way to help people because like we've mentioned, I certainly think there's a place for therapy and there's a place for medication. And I think we have to also open up a space for the literal earth medicine that has been here for eons to also play a role in helping where those things can't. Because it's one thing to put a band aid on a symptom, it's another thing to look into the subconscious or even the things that might be conscious to us, but we don't want to look at right now and heal that aspect.
Yes, 100%. So beautifully said, Leslie. Yeah, I feel like I could talk to you for hours here about this topic. It's an important one. It's fascinating to see how far we can come as human beings once we essentially come into the present moment
Mhm.
and find the tools that really work for us. So it's amazing to see. Let me ask you this, Leslie, before we wrap up for today. Is there anything else that comes up for you that we haven't perhaps talked about that you'd like to share, or anything you want to expand upon that we've talked about already?
I think we've really covered such a wonderful array of the topics that I feel really close to. In my work, have really been so pleasantly surprised by the wonderful people that I've gotten to meet and the way that this opens them. And I'll see someone come in, and I'm thinking about my client who I wrapped up my sessions with today. Like 4 months ago, the person I saw in front of me is vastly different than the person that I saw today. And
Yeah.
I think that for so many people, me specifically, when I started this journey, like I was running out of hope, and it gave me hope again. And I feel like that is such a beautiful thing that seems small in some ways, but is so powerful. And so
Yeah.
if you're listening and you are running out of hope, or you've tried a lot of other things, like maybe you're listening and you find something within this conversation that gives you a little hope, like I hope it does. And maybe it's a experience with the medicine, or maybe it's an experience with more mindfulness, but I think this has been beautiful, and I've been excited to have that convo with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Les. It's been such a pleasure to sit with you and have a beautiful conversation. And until next time, we say goodbye to the audience and to you. Thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us on this exploration of personal transformation. Your presence and engagement are at the heart of what we do, and I sincerely appreciate you, your time, and thirst for knowledge, inspiration, and empowerment. Please consider showing your support by hitting like, subscribe, leaving a comment, or writing a review. Your engagement not only fuels our mission, but also helps others discover these insights. For more daily guidance on personal transformation across the mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical realms, be sure to visit our website at unleashthyself.com. You can also find us on Instagram at Unleash Thyself Today, TikTok and YouTube at Unleash Thyself, and there we post daily content designed to inspire and empower you on your journey. If you have any specific thoughts, questions, or feedback, I truly value your input. Or if you'd like to have a conversation with me or work with me, please feel free to email me directly at constantine@unleashthyself.com. I would love to hear from you. Together, we're building a community united in authenticity and purpose. Once again, thank you for being a part of this movement. Until next time, continue to embrace your true self and live a life on purpose, with purpose. See you in the next episode.